Lil Aaron, Smart Death, and Little Lotus. What is there to really say about these guys? I mean, they form up the group known as Boyfriends. They've been in the emo rap space for quite a few years at this point, and they definitely have hits under their belt, but for the most part, it feels like nobody ever talks about them. So why is that? How did they push themselves to the level where most people know their name, but they're not really mainstream like a lot of other people within the genre? Well, let's find out when we look into the story of Smart Death, Little Aaron, and I guess Little Lotus, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So let's start off with the leader of the group, Little Aaron, also known as Aaron Jennings Puckett. He was born May 31st, 1994 in Goshen, Indiana, into a very religious family, with both his parents being fundamentalist Christians. His mother was a teacher, and he describes his father as an investor, which basically means that he's very rich. Yeah, that's right, Little Aaron started from a very rich household. Although that's never been confirmed, it's pretty obvious through the way that he blew up that somebody had to be funding his musical endeavors. But anyways, let's get back on track and talk about his childhood. So the family ended up moving around Indiana when he was growing up, settling in Ohio at one point for a couple years before then going to Scotia, Indiana, where he spent most of his younger years. So growing up, of course, he would mostly listen to Christian music, but at the same time, his parents did have one Beatles greatest hits album that would introduce Aaron to the other side of music, which he immediately fell in love with and started exploring more. And funnily enough, just like his future friend Lil Lotus, he would also play in the church band growing up, but unlike Lil Lotus, he actually enjoyed his time there. He liked performing, he liked getting in front of people, and it taught him a lot. Although the religious influence on Lil Aaron's life would eventually become a problem, leading him to be very repressed and not wanting to even be with a girl for fear that he might end up going to hell, so it definitely wasn't the best for his psyche. And just like most religious kids, he would eventually rebel against his parents, but for right now, he was actually trying to become an actor, even appearing in a couple short films during his youth, but unfortunately they never ended up going anywhere, and he realized that maybe music would be a better decision for him. You see, Lil Aaron had this thing where basically if he wasn't immediately good at something, he would want to do it. He tried playing soccer, but he realized that he would never be a professional soccer player. He would try to play video games with his friends, but after they started getting better than him, he realized he didn't want to do it anymore. So his only real passion at this point was music, because in his head, he thought he was really, really good. So up to this point, he was basically dressing like every other Christian kid in the area, but he would eventually find his own style at the age of 12 when he ended up going on MySpace and discovering pop punk as well as rock bands that he looked up to, like Blink 182 and all the classics that you already know. And he would start to emulate the way they dressed with ripped jeans, spiked chokers, and all the classic emo kid staples. But keep in mind, this was the early 90s, so not a lot of people were rocking with that, especially not in the religious compound that he was growing up in. Okay, maybe it wasn't that serious, it wasn't really a compound or some sort of cult, but it definitely was a religious area, and a lot of people would start to look at him funny for dressing in this way. And eventually by his teenage years, he would drive a couple hours to go see some metalcore shows in the local area before finally attempting to start up his own pop punk band where he would play acoustic guitar, learning how to play by his older brother and his father as well, because surprisingly his dad actually had quite a bit of interest in music, never doing it professionally or ever joining a band, but he definitely liked to play guitar, and he was pretty proud of his son for trying to do something musically as well. But as time went on, Aaron became more and more wild, starting to go to parties and eventually full on dropping out of school to try to pursue music full time, which didn't work out right away since his band was only known regionally and gigs were few and far between, meaning he wasn't making that much money. But it would eventually lead to an opportunity where he would go on tour with All Star Weekend and a bunch of different Disney acts, selling merchandise for them, which definitely got him a little bit more buzz, but at the same time, he was mostly spending money out of his own pocket, so it wasn't financially freeing. In fact, he actually ended up coming off a tour worse off than he was before and a little bit of debt, meaning that he had to work at a factory for a while to try to get himself out of that, which is once again another parallel to Lil Lotus. It's kind of funny to think about how many similarities there actually are between these two, both growing up in a religious family, going to the church band before then working in a factory, and then leaving to LA to try to pursue their dreams, which is pretty well what Lil Aaron ended up doing. He realized he was never going to make it in such a small city, so he either had to move to Nashville, New York, or LA, with him finally deciding on LA because it was the closest, taking all of his money and paying off his debt before then taking what was left, buying a bus ticket, and moving to LA. And when he first got there, he basically had nothing. He wasn't even making music, he didn't have any money to buy food, and he was sleeping on his friend's couch. So it was definitely a rags to riches type of story if you ignore the fact that his dad had money, but he was rebelling against him at the time, so I guess he really was on his own. So at this point, Lil Aaron wasn't trying to be a rapper, he was actually trying to be a manager, but funnily enough, he already had the name Lil Aaron before he started making music at all. And I mean, the origin behind this name is pretty obvious. His name is Aaron, and all he did was put little in front of it, but the reason that the name is so lame is because him and his friends were actually trying to come up with the lamest rap name they could possibly think of, and that's what he decided to stick on. At first, it was was a joke, but before too long, he ended up actually running with that. And having the name Lil Aaron as a manager actually helped him get more gigs and clients because people were interested in somebody with a different name as opposed to Mike Clark or Bill Kent or whatever it may be. So Aaron basically got his foot in the door in the music industry by working at a company called Milk and Honey as an intern, before then finally becoming a manager, doing a little bit of DJing, and basically any other odd job he could to try to make ends meet. He then ended up becoming a manager for a very short time before realizing that the artist that he was working with didn't really want to take any risks, so he decided to instead become a ghostwriter, which was definitely a lot more of a fruitful endeavor than managing ever was, because he actually ended up putting enough work into this industry that he eventually got big time connections with people like Lizzo and Black Bear. It was much later on in his career, but it was definitely some pretty big writing credits and some pretty big bags to go along with it. And with all the money he was making off of ghostwriting, he would actually put a down payment on a 3-bedroom house that he would later dub the Mini Mansion. And this place became somewhat important to his career because he would actually end up meeting people like I Love McConan, Adam 22, Little House Phone, and even Black Bear through having this house and inviting people over for parties. And he also ended up lending out one of the rooms to Little Soda Boy when he first got to LA, so it's kind of cool to see that everything somewhat connects at this mini mansion. You know, maybe it's a portal to a different world, maybe it's just a house, but either way, it's definitely important. And for the next little bit, that's basically all Lil Aaron was doing. He was writing songs, he was making money, he was partying, but eventually he decided that some of the songs that he wrote were way too weird to give to any artist as a ghostwriter, so he decided to start releasing his own music on SoundCloud in 2016, with him connecting to a producer known as Y2K to create a song known as Damn. And surprisingly, this track actually got an article written about it right after it came out, showing that either Lil Aaron had a lot of promise early on, or maybe he paid for it, not really sure one way or another, but it was quickly becoming apparent that Lil Aaron was going to be the next big upcoming rapper in the SoundCloud scene, with him dropping a couple more tracks after that point, including Mini Mansion Freestyle, which once again was another big hit, with the song getting 10k plays in a couple hours, followed up by 20k, 30k, and because Aaron knew so many people within the LA scene, it was definitely helping to spread his music around and getting him a buzz within that scene. He would then immediately follow up those songs with another one called To Be Honest featuring Brandon Wardell and Probably featuring McConan, which ended up becoming big hits as well, and slowly Lil Aaron was starting to gain a reputation for mixing rap and rock together, which a lot of people definitely didn't like, but a lot of people definitely did. And of course, the guy had green hair, so that got him a little bit more attention, not to mention that on Twitter, he would often wild out on people and go crazy, gaining him even more of a following on there, all leading up to the release of his first official mixtape known as Glowing Pains, which had one song on it known as Drugs, which became a massive hit, now having like 7 million streams on Spotify, way bigger than anything else Lil Aaron ever dropped. I'm not really sure why this one song became so big. It might be because people in the Avril Lavigne, MGK, Black Bear type of realm started listening to it. Maybe it just fit into those emo sensibilities. Maybe it was unique at the time and a lot of people listened to it because of that, or maybe it came down to the fact that he had green hair. Who really knows? But either way, after that, he would immediately open up for Lil Yachty before then appearing on the No Jumper podcast because of course he already had that connection with Adam 22 because the two of them have partied together in the past. I'm telling you guys, sometimes all you need to do is be around famous people to appear famous, and eventually you fake it till you make it and you end up like Lil Aaron. But anyways, he wouldn't stop there because he ended up dropping a couple more popular songs after that. And after that project blew up and started doing numbers, he immediately went on tour and then shot a music video for the track Drugs in early 2017. And there was actually one thing about this song that was a little bit controversial, which helped to push it a little bit farther, but was also kind of a detriment to Aaron's career at the time. And that was all because of the bar, "She's too fricked up to frick me, I'm too fricked up to give a frick," except for, of course, he didn't say frick, he said the other word. And if you don't get the implication there, well, talk to your mom and dad maybe, but basically it kind of sounds like he might want to force himself on somebody. Now, he would later clarify in the No Jumper podcast that that bar was supposed to be talking about the fact that he was so high that he didn't care if he hooked up with a woman at the party, but a lot of people thought the other version of things, so, you know, definitely got him a little bit more attention, but for negative reasons. And as soon as all of that blew over, he ended up dropping a song with Black Bear called Escalade after meeting him a couple times at different parties, ghostwriting for him a couple times, and finally forming that connection and being able to make an actual song with him, which was immediately followed up by an article claiming that Lil Aaron was the underground's best kept secret during 2017, which definitely could have been true because emo rap was just getting off to a start around the time, but at the same time, he didn't really end up getting any bigger than this. But he would get a little bit bigger when he eventually formed with the group known as Boyfriends alongside Lil Lotus as well as Smart Death. Basically, he met Smart Death at a show who introduced him to Lil Lotus, and then they all came over to the Mini Mansion to start working on a project project, self-titled Boyfriends. But before we get to that, we should go back to the origins of Smart Death and basically explain how he got to that point in time where he would eventually meet Lil Aaron and Lil Lotus. Mike Swark was born December 31st, 1993 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is in Canada, so shout out to him for being Canadian. We definitely don't have the best roster with people like Dax and Tom McDonald, but we do got Killy and Smart Death, so really, can any other country compare? I feel like we're stacked over here. Anyways, getting back to Smart Death, his cousin would basically introduce him to hip hop music, showing him the artist 50 Cent, who Smart Death would eventually become such a big fan of that he would actually wait outside of the store for his first album, Get Rich or Die Trying. I swear, when it comes to this album, it feels like almost every person in the SoundCloud wave was actually influenced by it. I remember a couple other rappers talking about how they listened to it as a kid and it was their favorite album of all time, so maybe there's something to it. Maybe it's mystical, magical, who knows? I mean, really, can you even call yourself a SoundCloud rapper if you never listened to Soulja Boy, Gucci Mane, Lil B, Bones, and played 50 Cent Blood in the Sand on PS2? I mean, those are all definitely staples of becoming a SoundCloud rapper. But on the other side of things, when he wasn't listening to hip hop music, he would often listen to bands like Blink 182 and all of that emo pop punk type of stuff. But at first, he wasn't trying to blend genres whatsoever. He was basically only doing that generic Eminem Logic type of rap, walking around school and freestyling, which a lot of people thought was pretty weird, but none of that was able to scare Smart Death away from his dreams of pursuing music, with him starting to go to festivals where he would see upcoming artists like XXXTentacion, Kendrick Lamar, and Danny Brown. And this would lead him to start dropping his own music under the name Smart, which basically translates to death in Slavic, but a lot of people didn't really understand that name, so he would later change it to Smart Death, basically meaning death death in two different languages, which is definitely very edgy, but I mean, the dude had red hair, painted fingernails, and a very sexy mustache, so what can you say? You really can't argue with any of that. In 2013, he would drop two projects called Fussy Boy as well as Autocorrect, which I'm not really sure if were dropped on SoundCloud or SoundClick, but either way, it seems very hard to find these projects nowadays besides a couple mentions on Genius. But from what we can gather, they were basically generic white boy rap, nothing too special, and eventually he would start to change into the more emo rap style that we now know him for. But at this point, it didn't really seem like he was fully set on music because he would start to dabble in different hobbies, including photography, with him taking a lot of pictures of people in the local area skateboarding before then taking those pictures and uploading them onto online forums, and then eventually discovering MySpace and posting them on there as well. It's starting to become apparent to me that MySpace must have been an emo kid's dream come true, because a lot of these underground rappers that would eventually go on to create emo rap, with people like Little Tracy, Coldheart, and Horsehead all getting their start on the platform before eventually moving into emo rap and going on to SoundCloud, which definitely makes sense because Little Tracy did say he can't fuck with you if you weren't friends with him on MySpace, so it's all coming together, baby. So all you guys who want to find goth mommies, you definitely got to go on MySpace. I mean, they're probably like 40 years old and have kids, but I mean, that's a real goth mommy after all. Gotta get you one. But anyways, back to Smart Death. He ended up discovering two artists on MySpace known as Wickedface and Horsehead, who he never really tried to reach out to at the time, but hearing the type of music they were creating definitely helped to inspire him to start creating his own type of emo rap. Although I definitely would put Smart Death more in the pop punk type of rap than actual emo rap, but let's not split hairs. Either way, he was finally finding his footing within the emo rap space, whatever you want to call it, and he was starting to make more unique music. But at this point, he was already done with high school and was heading to college to try to pursue a career in creative writing, but after realizing that basically nobody reads books anymore, he decided instead to finally put his full effort into making music and try to really make a go at being a musical artist. And keep in mind, he was like 24 years old at this point, so if you feel like you're out of the game and you're not making it anywhere in your musical career, Smart Death started pretty late in life and he ended up making it. So never give up, keep pushing, and eventually you might get as famous as him, which isn't that famous, but still, you get the point. But at this point, he was actually working as a pizza delivery man, with him writing lyrics in his car and buying $40 beats off his SoundCloud with the little bit of money that he actually was making from his job. He would often freestyle over these beats time and time again, trying to make absolute sure that it would be worth it to buy them when the time came, which is kind of funny because back in 2015, 2016, nobody was really paying for beats, but it seems like Smart Death was a little bit ahead of the equation because buying the beat basically meant that the producer couldn't come after him later on for royalties, so he was definitely making a smart move in the long run, but at the time it probably felt kind of foolish to be be paying money for beats that he could find online for free. He ended up recording all of his vocals on a $300 microphone before then sending them over to his producer, known as Audio Opera, who would then mix and master them. And at first, he definitely wasn't messing with that new style, wanting him to go back to more generic rap. But as Smart Death started to gain more and more attention online, he would eventually come around, and the two of them even work together to this day. And around this time, Smart Death would come across Lil Lotus, listening to a bunch of his music before finally deciding to reach out to him, with the two of them becoming quick friends, often calling each other at 2 a.m. when they were drunk out of their minds of FaceTime calling.
Yeah.
With the two of them meeting for the first time in LA, because Smart Death would often go over to LA for a couple months at a time. He wanted to be there full time, but seeing as how he was a Canadian citizen, he couldn't go over there without a visa. So for the first little bit, he would have to spend a month in America and then a month back in Winnipeg. But eventually Smart Death would figure it out, moving to LA full time into the mini mansion with Lil Aaron and Lil Lotus, where they would all form up the group known as Boyfriends and create the project also known as Boyfriends. Now, if you're wondering about Lil Lotus, I actually did a full-on video about him, but I will do a quick recap here if you don't want to watch that. Basically, Lil Lotus grew up in Texas. He was in a very religious family, often playing in a church band. His father was a very abusive drug addict who passed away when Lotus was only 17 years old, leading him to get in a bunch of trouble with the law before finally running away from home to try to join a metal band. During this time, he would get a girl pregnant, leading him to eventually give up on his dreams of being in a metal band and working at a warehouse, but he would then discover people like Horsehead and Wicked Phase and decide to make a go at being a solo artist. He eventually had a couple songs pop off on Astari before he then moved to LA full time, became a horrible drug addict, started burning absolutely every bridge he ever had, destroying his own tour, and then getting signed to Masquerilla before finally getting his career somewhat back on track and moving into the mini mansion with Lil Aaron and Smart Death. They would then drop the Boyfriends project in late 2017 before immediately starting to drop songs on Astari, Elevator, and even Trash A&B, including Kiss Me Through the DMs, another track called Check, and whatever this song is supposed to be titled, not really sure what that means. But either way, all these songs started to pop off, no doubt being funded by Lil Aaron, and Boyfriends was becoming a very popular group. I mean, it was definitely a smart idea to put three kind of small rappers together into one group. One of them had red hair, one of them had green hair, and one of them had purple hair, and all those different colors together definitely helped get them attention, not to mention the fact that they would often kiss each other on the lips and spit in each other's mouths in videos, which was definitely more controversial back in 2017. I mean, keep in mind, when Lil Peep came out of the closet as bisexual, a lot of people gave him heat, and a lot of people don't even want to believe that is true to this day. But Lil Lotus, Lil Aaron, and Smart Death were basically having a threesome on stage every single time they performed, and nobody really cared. But what people did care about is that Lil Lotus would often show up to these performances drunk out of his mind and start fighting fans, which had kind of a mixed reaction because some people liked to show up to the shows to see what Lil Lotus was going to do, and other people were annoyed that he wouldn't perform any of the music and would just start being crazy and belligerent, with the group eventually starting to perform at places like Emo Night and Warped Tour, which was kind of strange at the time because rappers never really came out to things like that. It's basically an entirely different subculture, but it seems like the Boyfriends were able to carve out their own path within that scene, so that was definitely good for getting them noticed by alternative music lovers, and eventually a couple of them even got signed to Epitaph Records, which is an older record company that mostly signs rock bands, but it seems like they took a particular fascination with Lil Lotus and Smart Death. I'm not really sure if Lil Aaron is signed to them as well, but I know for a fact that both Lotus and Smart Death are still with that record company to this day, and they're still doing shows with them, helping to keep their careers somewhat alive even to this day. But at this point, I'm basically going to run through what both Smart Death and Lil Aaron have done up to date, starting with Lil Aaron. He ended up dropping 2 more mixtapes in 2017, one called Aaron Judge Rookie of the Year, followed up by Rockstar Genius, which actually had a feature from Travis Barker. I mean, in 2017, it actually was kind of impressive to get Travis Barker on a song before 10K started signing artists and basically giving every single one of them a Travis Barker feature, but that was basically the peak of Lil Aaron's relevancy. I'm not saying he didn't do anything after that point. He ended up dropping a couple more mixtapes, he ended up touring around, and even got a NASCAR painted in his own colors, which is definitely pretty cool. But seeing as how he never signed a big time record deal and only stuck with the distribution deal, it was completely up to him to be his own A&R, which he was actually really good at in 2016, but times have definitely changed, and if you look at his numbers now, he's definitely not doing the best. He actually put out a mixtape about a week ago, and the numbers are definitely hurting, but either way, Lil Aaron is always going to be big in LA. I definitely don't think he's ever going to be broke again because after all, he probably made a lot of money ghostwriting for other artists, not to mention he still does shows, which probably pay pretty well. And you never know, Lil Aaron might randomly get a TikTok hit at one point. That could definitely happen because his type of music is definitely very trendy, and people like Mod Sun, MGK, and Avril Lavigne are still doing very well with that exact same style. But either way, all those connections he has in LA will definitely keep him rich and going for the rest of his life. So let's look at Smart Death next. He ended up making a lot of tracks with some pretty big names in the emo rap genre, like Horsehead, Little Bo Weep, and he even created a track with Charlie Shuffler as well, which all went on to do numbers on SoundCloud. He ended up dropping a really big song on Elevator called She Kill Me Softly Laughing, When I Hit the Blunt I Be Coughing, which ended up doing numbers even though the song name is absolutely ridiculous, followed up by another track called I Don't Feel Anything, before then dropping another big track on Hysteria called Everything. All these tracks ended up getting 1 million views each before he then dropped his debut mixtape called Sethany, featuring another big emo rapper known as Crippin' So Pretty. After that, the Boyfriend's EP would drop, and of course a lot of those tracks would go on to do numbers as well, and soon after that he would appear on the Masquerilla podcast, only doing that in the DM show, not really the full-on interview like Lil Lotus, but either way he was getting more media attention. He then dropped a project in 2018 called We'll Be Alright, and then continued to tour, even doing a couple shows in Europe, and if you look at the shows, he's still doing pretty decent numbers, so it seems like Smart Death also ended up in a pretty alright spot. Although to be honest with you, I think Smart Death might have a little bit of money in the family as well, so I don't think he ever had anything to worry about in the first place. So now we have to look at Lil Lotus, the final member. Well, the dude ended up signing with Epitaph Records as well, getting a pretty generous deal with them before them parting ways with Masquerilla as his management. He ended up starting up his own band, and after that he would drop 2 studio albums in 2022 and 2024, which did pretty okay. He still does shows, but he mostly pops out to venues with a lot of other people performing, so he's not really the biggest act anymore that can really draw a crowd. The only really big notable thing that he did recently was having Little Saku in one of his music videos, and from what I've heard, the only reason that she appeared in that music video is because he actually wanted to get with her, but he didn't realize that she actually had a really big nose in real life, so after seeing her in person, he decided he didn't want to date her. If you want to know more about Little Saku, definitely go check that video out. But besides that, he basically does podcasts to get like 10 to 20 views at this point, so I think it's pretty fair to say that Little Lotus has fully fallen off. Smart Death still does somewhat okay, and Lil Aaron is definitely still killing it in LA, so at this point, that's the state of the boyfriends, also known as emo rap side characters. I do actually somewhat like these guys' music. I've interacted with one of them. They definitely weren't a nice person, but besides that, I'm not really going to say too much more. Shout out to the boyfriends, and besides that, talk to you guys next time. Oh yeah, and subscribe to the channel because I'm trying to get to 15K. I think I'm almost there, might pass it soon. And I also got a second channel where I post more personal stuff, so if you want to check that out as well and help me build that channel too, that'd be awesome. But with all that said, see you in the next one, and definitely let me know who you want to see next. Anyways, peace.